Our next speaker is Scott McCollough. For 10 years, Scott was the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Texas and represented the state before regulatory agencies with jurisdiction over gas, telephone, water, and electric utilities. In private practice, he is focused on public law and regulation relating to telecommunications and recently argued the successful case against the FCC on behalf of an environmental health trust and Children's Health Defense. If you didn't get to hear the oral argument, you really should. It was quite something. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Scott McCollough.
Please set me free.
I keep hearing that local zoning authorities, they all keep saying their hands are tied. That's an illusion. There are indeed some specific limitations and obligations. Some things that you cannot directly do. There are other things that you must do. But each local jurisdiction still retains lots of discretion and power, especially concerning location, aesthetics, and electrical, building, and fire safety, among other things. The telecoms want you to be the lion, tin man, or scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz. But Congress did not outlaw local courage, did not remove your heart or preempt your brain. Find these things within you and unlock your power with an ordinance that contains 3 essential components, and then put the right provisions and detail in each. Make rules, then enforce them and follow them. You will then be able to make the right choices and decisions on behalf of your constituents. What are the 3 essential components? Well, they are the, can we go back to the second slide, please, Doug? They are the procedure and policies, which tells everyone what happens when an application comes in, how the staff processes it, who gets notice, who makes the initial decision. It sets out how the public can obtain the information and get additional information. It tells when the reports are due, when a hearing is required, and all the timelines. It provides the appeal process if there is one. The other very essential part, and I think Andrew's going to talk about this a lot, is the specific policies that will apply for each application. Now, I always make sure that there are good definitions in there, that there is a clear statement of the acceptable locations by type, whether it be a macro, small cell, exempt facility, whatever kind it is. And let me emphasize, the Communications Act still retains wide local discretion on location, except for what they call exempt facilities. And we can talk about exempt facilities if you want. They set out what the safety requirements are. The FCC has expressly held that each jurisdiction, and they just reinforced it a year or so ago, can enforce all generally applicable health and safety code. You set out your aesthetic, how you want these things decorated so that they don't look so bad, at least to whoever it is that's making that decision. Frankly, I think we should put clown noses on them, but everybody gets to make their own local choice. Then the very important piece of it, the most important in my mind, is how the wireless carrier can prove any claim of an effective prohibition. So you can set out base rules. And if the wireless carrier says, wait a minute, that rule would effectively prohibit me from providing service, then you need to put in a waiver process with the correct burden of proof. I always recommend clear and convincing evidence. That is your out clause, because if the carrier can indeed prove the denial of the permit for that facility and that location would indeed constitute an effective prohibition with clear and convincing evidence, then they should probably get their permit under the act. But that's a high burden. So you set your base rules and then you give them a waiver. The other part that's important is application content requirements. This is really important too, because if you set out in the beginning the things that must be in an application, in other words, you require the wireless carrier to establish a prima facie case at the front end in the application, everything gets a lot easier. Under the FCC shot clock rules, the local jurisdiction has a specific period of time to determine whether the application is complete. If it is not complete under whatever the rules are at the local jurisdiction, then the staff can send a deficiency letter and it stops the shot clock. So if you make them if you detail what it must be in there, the staff can catch it and they can stop the clock. It also allows, it eliminates issues. People will see the answers to their questions. So only the contested issues, the issues of concern where people have a disagreement, will be the ones that have to be resolved. It shortens the time that's required to make a process and decision. So it's very essential for shot clock management. Obviously, it also makes it everyone able, the public and the staff, to assess if all the criteria are met. As Andrew will probably mention, under the Act, if there is a denial, then the local jurisdiction must enter specific findings, explain how it got to the result, what the facts were it was relying on. If you have very specific content requirements, it becomes a lot easier to make these findings that are required under the Act so as to justify the decision, and it makes it easier to prevail in any of them. I've got a couple of illustrative examples in there at the bottom. I'm not going to go through them now, but those are just a couple of things that you might want to look at when you're thinking of what should be in the application content. Now, the last slide, please. Thank you, Doug. The other essential part is what we call permit conditions. These are the conditions and obligations that will be imposed by an approved permit. In other words, you get this permit, but here are the rules that will apply during the term of the permit. I have draft terms with, up to 60 conditions. You don't always need that many. You can write them in different ways, but most of the really good ordinances that I've seen do have a lot of conditions. Indemnity is a very important issue to local jurisdictions. You need to make sure that the wireless provider indemnifies the local jurisdiction so that the local jurisdiction doesn't get hung with any costs in the event of litigation for whatever reason, for some reason, once the facility goes up. Insurance requirements, also another important thing. Almost all of the insurance requirements that I see have terms with very, very low complete damages. These are generally basic insurance terms. I see coverages within $1 to $5 million. If you're just in a fire zone where fires are a problem, one of these things takes fire and burns down 10 houses, that's not going to be enough insurance. Another thing is that we always recommend that the insurance not have a pollution exclusion, that indeed the insurance coverage include pollution coverage, just in case something goes wrong, some pollutant is put out in the atmosphere. And yes, that would also cover RF injuries. If somebody successfully sues the wireless carrier for damages caused by injury from the RF, the insurance would cover it. And then, of course, a performance bond. Most jurisdictions know what those are. You have to have other things they need to do. They have to accept in writing all the conditions. They have to pass a post-construction inspection. One of the conditions will be how long the permit is in effect, and then at the tail end, an obligation to remove. Many jurisdictions impose a deadline to start and complete construction. You address eventualities that are arising during construction. For example, if they discover some cultural resources or some as yet unknown environmental issue, they find some skeletal remains, how you deal with that. Then you have continued compliance with all the terms and conditions, and you should require a regular affidavit of compliance with FCC emissions regulations and all other regulations and conditions. Then finally, a consent for regular inspections during the term. These are just a couple of examples. There are many more, but it's the three essential components of an effective wireless ordinance that sets out policy judgments that have been made by the local community on what is right. And I'm going to close by saying you still do have an extraordinary amount of discretion to decide where the best place is for each of these facilities. You have a lot of discretion to determine whether the proposed facility, whatever it is, however it is designed, is appropriate for the location they are proposing under any number of reasons. And you need to have a good ordinance that allows you to exercise that discretion in proper fashion so that you can then make the findings that you need, and if necessary, be able to defend any action in any appeal. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for that. That was great.
Maybe it's not playing.